is saturated, add gases, and then start building more units on top of our 5 roaches? What if they're doing a Marauder Hellion all-in, Marauder Hellbat all-in at like 9 minutes, you know, with mass Marauder Hellion off 2 base, no 3rd command center, no upgrades, no medevacs. Like, obviously we're not going to 70 drones and then building units and then holding that off. So there's all sorts of little scouting reactions which come in. So rather than looking at the composition that we're facing, let's look at signs of aggression and signs of greed. So what I mean is when we scout our opponent, let's divide everything we see into a sign of aggression or a sign of greed. And that gives us a general sense of, okay, we saw 3 signs of aggression, no signs of greed, let's fucking build you if we can. Because we've got a 3rd hatchery, we've got 50 drones. If there's no signs of greed and just a lot of signs of aggression, you know, let's just build a lot of units. And this allows us, outside of build orders, outside of compositions, to simply come up with general rules for I need to build a lot of stuff to stay alive right now, or I need to be greedy as all hell because my opponent's being really greedy. I can take advantage of it through that. So, okay. Let's think of some signs of greed. So let's go to this 6-minute 30 mark in this game. Now this opponent is not the highest level opponent. As you said, he's like Silver League or something like that. He was a little bit lower than you. His build order is pretty unrefined. But you can imagine, if you come in at the 6-minute 30 mark, what are some signs of greed which you would normally see?
I would see a fully saturated base at the natural. I could see another command center going down.
So 3rd CC. I think the fully saturated natural, even if they're all inning you, they might fully saturate that. So I don't think you can read too much into that against Terran. Against Zerg,
I guess then scouting the 3rd CC would be a sign of greed.
That's a really, really big one. Can you think of any other signs of greed besides a 3rd command center? What else is a sign that the Terran is investing a bit later into the game?
Would the count in the production facilities be smaller because they're not investing money into production early?
That would generally be a byproduct of it, but we try not to mark that specifically as a sign of greed because they could be hiding them, or you know, they could have just been constantly producing out of them because Terran works in a little bit of a weird way. So offload production facilities, they can still be aggressive, but you are right. So for instance, if they have a 3rd command center and 2 engineering bays and a fast starport, they can be very greedy. Now, a starport kind of works both ways, and then it can be a sign of greed and a sign of aggression, but I like to normally put it in terms of the sign of greed. So most important, though, is double engineering bay. Engineering bays, in general, especially double, big sign of greed. So if you see two engineering bays, 3 command centers, like, those are 2 signs of greed. You don't really need to worry about too much. Maybe they can do an 8 Hellion run by, but that's pretty much the extent of the attacks they can do to you. Now a starport is kind of a mixed signal, right? It's a little bit both ways, but it basically says they can't have the strongest, most all-in ground push with a medevac. It's often good for timings which seek to do some bit of damage. Hellion Banshee, maybe a medevac drop. Maybe, you know, repairing the Hellbats as they come in. But generally speaking, it's something which is very good for transitioning into the later stages of the game. So if you see the starport going down relatively early, getting a reactor on it to get medevacs, especially with reactor, that starport is a sign of play that goes later. That being said, if you don't see a 3rd command center, you don't see a double engineering bay, and you see a fast reactor starport, it usually means they're going to be doing very strong 2-base bio drops, which start up around the 9-minute mark. So that's the same thing. I mean, they can also do a really strong Hellbat attack, even with some Stim Marauders, when they've got a 3rd command center. If there's just one sign of greed, they can still be quite aggressive. Obviously, it's not going to be the most all-in, most hard-hitting aggression, but it can still be very strong. So what we're always looking for is, are there 2 signs of greed, which we can kind of verify. Yeah, so that's a few signs of greed. So let's talk about, I guess actually, Another sign, sorry, the one I forgot. Last sign of greed is add-ons. So lots of add-ons equals greed, you know, later gameplay. Because they don't kick in for a while. So obviously there's certain timing-based plays which do involve add-ons. That makes sense. But if you see lots and lots of reactors going down and lots of barracks, that's more a sign of investing in the late game. For instance, let me actually describe what a lot of Terran players will do with their build is after just 6 Hellions, they will lift off their factory and they will just build a reactor. And they'll lift it off and they'll build another reactor. And they're just moving around preparing reactors for barracks to go onto. And you might think, oh, that's kind of weird. But basically, that's the most efficient thing they can do. Whereas if they're going aggressive, they might build up to 12 Hellions. Or they might start pumping out Widow Mines straight away, so their first medevac pressure can do a lot of damage. There's a lot of different varieties they can do, but if you just basically say lots and lots of add-ons early is a big sign of greed, that's a good way to go about it.
Is there an airplane landing on your house?
Yeah, it's I just need to duck out and wave the flashy lights in my hands. Sorry, man. Looks like we got the bad time of day. There's always just a few times in the day when they just go crazy. It's just like I'm getting dive bombed constantly or something like that. All right. So signs of aggression, conversely, are basically the opposites.
So no third CC.
Yeah, no
Maybe a
third
single engineering bay for +1 attack.
There could be, but even that single engineering bay is still a sign of greed. It's just only a very small sign of greed. So you know, it can. Remember what I was saying. Sure. Even a big sign of greed, like a third command center, on its own, can still lead into a strong attack. So it's about how many signs of greed together. So you see a single engineering bay, tells you that's a slight sign of greed. They can still all-in you off that. On its own, it tells you almost nothing. But it's when you get a few pieces of the picture and you put them together that you start to get a really good idea of exactly, you know, how much you can push your greed, how far your opponent's going to press you. So no third CC, no eBays, etc., etc. But what are the key things? Lots of production without add-ons, just producing units. So you see barracks with no add-ons, just producing units. It's a big sign. You're going to be seeing some stuff going on. I don't know if it was. I don't think it was Jachi. I think it was a different NSO Terran player who used to do that a lot towards the end of Wings of Liberty. He had these like kind of really early marine tank push styles, and Zerg players kept dying to it because they would by default just fully saturate a third, drop a fourth, and they'd get overwhelmed, and they'd always be so surprised by it. Like, what the hell? And it's just it's a marine tank push. It shouldn't be that hard to hold. But because he kept adding barracks and only very slowly adding add-ons in between waves of aggression, so a lot of the time he'd have a lot of barracks just producing with no add-ons.
Right.
He'd be able to hit these timings very, very fast. However, if you just didn't go too greedy because you saw these as signs of aggression, which most pro gamers at the time, they didn't see it as a sign of aggression. They just like, whatever. No add-ons on the barracks, that's cool. If you just stop your drones a bit earlier, stop the first attack, his follow-up's so weak that you're in such a sick position. So lots of production without add-ons, you know, just producing units, that's a big sign of aggression. Another one would be obviously, well, just lots of production early, duh. But that's the main one. You know, it's a lack of the signs of greed, and it's seeing them not having add-ons. I'm kind of racking my brain for what else. Really fast armory. That's the new one. Obviously, that's always a bit like, hey, wait a second, what are you doing there? Obviously, if you see a double armory, that's a different tell, all of its own, saying mech. But yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I'm pretty sure that's it. So it would actually be a cool exercise for you to look through a bunch of pro games as well as your own replays and look for signs of aggression versus signs of greed. You'll notice that in the pro games it's a lot easier to actually catalog because everyone's playing super efficiently. So you can say there's very obvious tells, like for instance, 5 minute 30. You can scout with Obi, and at like 6 minutes, you see 2 barracks, half finished. Or actually, let's say 6 minutes 30, 2 barracks, a second and third barracks, adding reactors, and starport starting. And you can immediately see, okay, this is going to be 3 racks, stim plus 3 racks stim, 2 medevac pressure. Basically, where as soon as the reactor finishes on the starport, they build 2 medevacs, they boost across with 16 marines with stim and sometimes combat shields as well, and they start hitting you. And at 9 minutes 30, they hit at your front with 20 marines, 2 medevacs, plus the earlier 6 hellions. And this is something you can really catalog at a pro level, where you can say, I see this exact timing of this, and it means this. But that doesn't always work when you're playing against the ladder, where people do all sorts of crazy shit. People are sometimes just less efficient, or they have their own understanding. And that's why we just say, he's done 2 greedy things. I can be pretty greedy. Okay, I don't see any greedy things, and I see an extra barracks just building units. I'm going to be a bit safer. Dividing it in that way, it's going to take a little bit for you to kind of instinctively get used to reacting, but I think it should work out pretty well. So far, you've been pretty good at understanding everything. Your mechanics are there, so just a matter of keeping this in your head while you're playing ZB.